Georges Simenon, the players of the Grand-Café Chapter 1. It all began that winter. As evening fell, Maigret found himself at a loose end. For a month, he had passed the time twiddling the knobs of his radio, leaving it only for half an hour to leaf through 3 different newspapers. Then he would abandon the dining room, which had become his permanent lair, to conduct a brief inspection of the kitchen. Still at it, he would ask his wife, "Not finished yet?" He would loiter there, unable to fathom how women could spend the entire day in the kitchen, until one day Madame Maigret finally snapped. "You don't know what to do with yourself. Why don't you go play cards at the Grand-Café?" Maigret resisted for a long time, weeks, perhaps even months. To be sure, he had already gotten to know everyone in Montserrat, where he had settled after his retirement. He felt no shame in being a pensioner, tending his garden, or tinkering in a little summer house by the river. He occasionally dropped by the Grand-Café near the bridge, the most modern establishment in Mung, to have a glass of beer or, now and then, an anise with water. And yet, it felt like a small defeat the day he finally yielded to Madame Maigret's persistence. He took a seat at a table covered in a squared cloth, where they played manille, and asked, like a true novice, "What are the stakes?" "Drinks, as usual, but a man like you won't have to open his wallet very often." He decided to play once, just a trial run. But the very next day, a boy was sent to tell him he was expected. Little by little, he picked up the specific jargon of his partners and entered their tight-knit circle. In essence, he became one of the lot from the Grand-Café, the regulars for whom Angeli would bring drinks without even being asked. And like the others, whenever he won, he would exclaim, "Well, Angeli, no roundies again? Do you eat them or what?" It became a habit, and it was hard to tell if he actually enjoyed it or not. In winter, when the roads were thick with mud, Maigret would happily don his polished clogs to walk down to the bridge. During the grape harvest, and for the month that followed, they were served young white wine straight from small bottles. In December and January, and sometimes February, they sipped grog or mulled wine. In spring, it was aniseed aperitifs, which gave way to chilled local wines in the summer. 36. If you say 36, you've got 40. I'm calling Mazir. 41. On what? The 3 other players were on familiar terms with him, calling him by his first name or, more often, by his trade. "Your turn, butcher." The butcher would come straight from work, sometimes still wearing his blood-stained apron. He lost more often than the rest and would grumble because he made mistakes, but he paid up without a word. He was happy just to be there, in that temple, among the cream of Montserrat society, where he felt he was warmly accepted. Sometimes his young son would come fetch him because a customer had walked into his shop, located directly across from the Grand-Café, its red-painted railings visible from the window. The butcher would then hand his cards to someone else at the table, a move the others usually exploited to rig his score or play some other practical joke on him. "Over to you, Citron." That was the nickname for the garage owner, who played seriously, always won, and was merciless toward his partner's blunders. The third regular was Maigret. Everyone called her the inspector, and didn't dare push the jokes too far. The 4th player changed, when the mayor, who also served as a local vet, wasn't there, and if the blacksmith didn't happen to drop by, they would call for Bain, the owner of the Grand-Café. By 5 minutes of 5, everyone knew the butcher was standing on his doorstep, just waiting for the signal. At about the same time, Maigret would arrive, puffing on his pipe with his hands deep in his pockets. Opposite the Grand-Café was another place, the Café du Commerce. It was smaller, darker, a second-rate establishment not even worth mentioning. "Go find your father, lad. Tell him they're waiting for him." And the son of the blacksmith, the garage owner, or the vet would instantly ditch his playmates and race to his front door, shouting, "Papa, the lot from the Grand-Café are waiting for you." "I'm coming." They talked politics, too, but only after the game, if they managed to finish early. If the butcher won, they called him a fascist. Women were rarely mentioned, as there were only 2 around. One was the owner's wife, Madame Urbain, pale and dismal as a toadstool. She was forever worried about her digestion, swallowed a mountain of pills, and told anyone who would listen about her ailments, which did little for her charm. Then there was Angeli, a servant girl of about 20, A choice morsel, the garage owner had once remarked to Maigret. But Urbain keeps a close eye on her. Oh, are you suggesting that he... Sure. Quiet. Was there any truth to it, or not? Maigret paid her no mind, and didn't much trust the garage owner's gossip. To him, Angeli was simply a pleasant enough girl with a nervous gait and a restless look in her eyes. As for the others, they were undoubtedly dreaming of what lay hidden beneath her bodice. While the game was on, people would drift into the cafe, have a quick glass, and sit behind the players for a moment. They would nod or shake their heads in approval or disapproval of the deal, though, of course, their opinions counted for nothing. The lot from the Grand-Café consisted of the 4 Manille players. It was for them that the table was wiped down at 4:30, and a fresh deck with gilt edges was bought every 2 weeks, ever since Maigret had pointed out that the old cards were getting sticky. Who could have imagined that here, in this circle, the very embodiment of peaceful French provincial life, Maigret would find himself swept up in such dramatic events? For the first time in his life, he wouldn't be observing as a professional investigator from the outside, but would be drawn directly into the heart of it. And imagine the weight of it for a former commissioner of the special branch, when the terrible news finally tore through the town. One of the lot from the Grand-Café is a murderer. It happened in April, during those weeks when they sat down to play before sunset while it was still light outside, and finished in the gathering dusk. It was the beginning of the month. The butcher had set off for the Vade the day before and returned that very afternoon. Once a month, he traveled somewhere near Lucan. He had explained it once, though Maigret hadn't taken much interest in the secrets of the meat trade, that he rented marshy meadows in the Vade to fatten up lean cows he bought on the cheap. He climbed out of the small truck. He never drove anything else, dressed as he always was for his trips, in a hunting jacket, brown leather gaiters, and velvet breeches, over which he could easily throw his working smock if needed. Later, people would try to recall every tiny detail that evening, but at the time, no one gave a thought. They were simply enjoying the beautiful evening and the sunset over the banks of the Loire. Maigret remembered a stray thought crossing his mind. Strange, why hasn't he gone inside his own place? The butcher's shop was so close to the Grand-Café that you could see its marble counters through the windows, yet the butcher hadn't stopped in, even for a minute. At that moment, Angeli was serving the aperitifs. Only the blacksmith stuck to his victual phrase all year round. Today, the mayor, the local vet, was there. He was a small man with a beard and mustache, devilishly restless, grumpy when he lost, and quite animated whenever the conversation turned to women. He was the only one who openly teased Angeli with off-color remarks. Maigret noticed that while Urbain, ever professional host, said nothing at such moments, his face would noticeably darken. After some brief small talk, they got down to business. "Deal," the mayor said to Urbain. "Not a chance." "After you," the cafe owner replied. In the back of the room, a radio was playing. No one listened to it. It was just part of the atmosphere. Urbain's 2-year-old heir was crawling on all fours near the stove, while Madame Urbain, suffering even more than usual from her sluggish digestion, was embroidering a cushion for her parlor, a room that no one ever entered. 36, 37, 56. The setting sun streamed through the windows, catching the mayor's reddish hair and surrounding his face with a halo. Maigret thought the little man looked quite like a faun. If he were a doctor, I wouldn't trust him with my wife, he thought idly. The butcher sat there, silent and clearly exhausted from his trip, as it had rained all morning. Moreover, he seemed deeply preoccupied, and it wasn't long before he showed it. "I need to see the notary," he announced, taking his seat. "Tonight?" the blacksmith asked quickly, his skin pitted with tiny black soot marks. "Do you think he'll wait for you?" "I called his house. It's all settled. I don't like keeping large sums of money at home." "Very wise. Though if you played the 7 of hearts instead of that second trump, I wouldn't have had to discard my manila diamonds and get stuck." "Angeli." The girl approached. No one but the blacksmith looked up. "Bring me a bit of ice, do you hear?" Urbain was sitting, as was his habit, directly behind Maigret. Since he could see the cards, he kept shaking his head in silent disapproval. "Hey, no coaching. Heaven forbid, Mr. Mayor." But had they really heard what the butcher said? Slowly, as the chips piled up in front of players, once again they had to ask for more roundies. The light faded, the lamps were lit, and the street outside the window became a black void, pierced only by the single glowing lantern above the butcher's shop. What do you want at the notary? You're not looking to buy that house in Joel's, are you? What? You want to buy it? Not me, but I know someone who does. Maigret, absorbed in the game as always, took no interest in the idle chatter. He was hoping for Mizir, a prospect far more enticing to him. Do you know what the Belgian wants to do with it? I heard. A cinema. Gentlemen, please, the game, protested the blacksmith, who had declared 46. Mizir on the table. Maigret finally ventured. He had made it, for the first time since he'd started coming there. Mark me down for 5. He told the others. Are you really buying it? The vet persisted. Lord, no. The butcher sighed, looking embarrassed. But he really should have told me. I promised the Belgian that no one would drive the price up. A cinema would be good for everyone. The game resumed. Maigret noticed a pharmacist and the doctor come in. They usually headed to the second room for a game of billiards and never lingered near the manille players. 26. If you're passing, I'm out. They showed their hands. Angeli brought another round of drinks. They had a ritual of drinking midway through every game. Why? At the exact moment she leaned over the table, did the commissioner look at Urbain? And why did it strike him that the cafe owner looked somber, like a man who had just discovered his beloved's betrayal? Good grief, he thought. Yesterday was Angeli's day off. She went to Orleans. If he really is her lover, he's probably jealous of those weekly excursions of hers. The cards were dealt again. There was no time to dwell on it. He sipped his aniseed aperitif and began smoking his pipes one after another. Madame Maigret was a remarkable woman. She needed no one else to be happy and could spend the entire day in the kitchen or the pantry, alone with her thoughts. But did she actually think? Enough. He didn't want to be unkind. Yet there were days when the atmosphere of the Grand-Café felt particularly stifling, and he felt like a dog on a leash. Had he really left the Quai d'Orfèvres just to play cards with these well-meaning rustics? They gave him only 5 minutes' grace. If he was late, that wretched boy with the shrill voice, the vet's son, as ginger as his father, would already be shouting at the garden gate. The lot from the Grand-Café are waiting for you. Enough. No more cards. Never again. If only he could win one more Mizir. What is it? Urbain asked his wife, who had called out to him. He went over to her. They spoke in hushed tones. Maigret reflected that poor Urbain had married a very unpleasant woman, and his fling with Angeli, if it even existed, didn't seem like much fun either. Well, that was life. If you look closely enough, life flowed the same way everywhere. In the small towns along the Loire, the Cher or the Rhône, only the trifles were different. In the south, Maigret would be playing boules, and in Lille it would be skittles. You've lost. The mayor said, standing up and wiping his mustache, which was always damp like a spaniel's. As for the order of business at the end of the game, the butcher and Maigret were the two losers. The former commissioner went to counter, paid his bill, and gave Angeli a franc tip. The others only gave 10 sous, but there was a certain standard for a loser, nothing to be done about it. However, there was one significant detail. To pay, the butcher first pulled out his wallet, showing everyone how stuffed it was, so full that 1,000-franc notes were sticking out of it, and muttered, "You see, I really must get to the notary." The doctor and the pharmacist, both young men, one blonde and one dark, were playing billiards as usual. In the evening, they would sit down to bridge with their wives. "Good night, Commissioner." "Good night, everyone." And that was that. With his hands in his pockets, Maigret trudged down the dark street. There was still a light on in the grocery store, but the lamps in the window had already been extinguished. He had to walk as far as the third gas lamp and then turn right. He had almost reached it when the butcher's truck overtook him and pulled over, waiting. This was unusual. The former commissioner thought the butcher wanted to tell him something. "Do you think I can drop by the notary's house if the office is already closed?" "Well, if he knows you." "Right then. Good night." Later, Maigret would have to remember this. The truck's body was painted in a camouflage pattern. The vehicle vanished into the night, its taillights glowing. Maigret turned right, pushed the door open with practiced gesture, and sniffed, as he did every evening, at the kitchen smells. It smelled of rabbit, a rare treat at this time of year. A farmer from Clary had been hunting rabbits the day before, because they were ravaging his fields. Did you win? Lost. It seems to me you lose far more often than you should. Don't you think the others might be cheating? Honest Madame Maigret even suspected the lot from the Grand-Café. No, it only cost me 4 francs 50 a night. Well, if it keeps you entertained. In truth, it didn't entertain him, but he couldn't explain that to her. It had become a passion, a necessity. In short, a craving that hit him at a specific hour, leaving him with a sense of shame not unlike that of a drug addict or an incurable drunk. What did you talk about? Nothing much. You don't talk much when you're playing. Do you know what I was told? How should I know? That Angeli, the little maid from the cafe, was pregnant and that she's already dealt with it. I didn't notice a thing. Of course not. She was barely 3 months along. She told the girl from the pharmacy. Who? After the rabbit and the almond cream tart, Madame Maigret's specialty, he settled into his armchair by the fireplace. He had sat there for the last 3 years, even in summer when the grate was cold, and began leafing through the local and Paris newspapers. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, voices erupted in the street, followed by a frantic pounding of the door knocker. Commissioner, quick! Commissioner! It was the blacksmith. He was a man who drank nothing but Villefrays, yet tonight he looked drunk with shock. Behind him, crowded people Maigret knew only by sight, with children darting between their legs. The butcher's been murdered. What? Come quickly. The mayor is calling the gendarmerie. They found his truck by the roadside with a burst tire, and the butcher himself with a bullet in his chest. But where? Where did it happen? Just outside Mung, a few minutes after he left the cafe. A coal merchant driving past in his lorry saw the headlights shining in the ditch. He brought the butcher back to his place. I might have known. In other words, everything had already been meddled with. But even as Maigret prepared to lose his temper, a sudden wave of indignation rose within him. This is none of my business. You said you've alerted the gendarmerie. Don't you remember anything? What am I supposed to remember? Think of what he told us tonight, what he had in his pocket. People will start talking. They'll want to. Damnation. They would start looking among the regulars of the Grand-Café. And there weren't that many of them. When did you last see him? The blacksmith asked. Near the crossroads. He pulled up for a moment. Did you speak to him? He spoke to me. Ah! No, not that. It was bad enough that a crime had occurred in Maigret's immediate circle. There was no need to start with suspicions. You really ought to go. Everything's at 6s and 7s. His wife thinks it's some kind of trap. A trap? How so? She won't explain. Maigret hunted for his hat. Unable to find the old felt one he preferred for the country, he donned his bowler, an act that felt, in its own way, symbolic. I'll be back soon, he promised his wife, just as he used to do when leaving for an investigation that might last a week. She took it in her own way and advised, Don't forget your key. This isn't work. I'll be back. It was a foolish sight, of course. Marching down the streets with a blacksmith at the head of a crowd of 20 onlookers, not counting the pack of children, among whom the more informed boys were exclaiming, That's the old man from the police. He's going to investigate now. You'll see. A crowd had gathered on the main street, between the butcher's shop and the Grand-Café. Look, the gendarmes are here. 3 of them had arrived on 2 motorcycles, one with a sidecar, looking formidable in their uniforms. They rode straight into the heart of the crowd. Madame Maigret didn't understand. She was utterly surprised when the commissioner returned only half an hour after he had been summoned. What's wrong? Is it over already? No, but I want no part of it. He was acerbic, irritable, with no real interest. He began twiddling the knobs of the radio. Was he killed for money? Madame Maigret asked suddenly, busy with her sewing. The money is gone, yes. Had he much on him? I believe so. She assumed Maigret was shaken by the murder of one of the companions, a man he'd been playing cards with only moments before. And, of course, but a certainty was slowly taking root in the commissioner's mind. This business was not nearly as simple as it appeared on the surface. That was why he had spoken to the crowd gathered in the square outside the Grand-Café in a decisive tone that brooked no further argument. I am no longer in the business. Now it was the talk of the town. Were they waiting for the chief inspector from the mobile brigade in Orleans? Maigret knew nothing and wanted to know even less. He went to bed, though it wasn't yet 10 o'clock. Around 8 the next morning, he came downstairs, unshaven and in his slippers, and poured himself a cup of coffee. Aren't you going out to get the news? No. He contented himself with retrieving the local paper from the mailbox. The card game concluded between the prominent figures of our town, including our esteemed mayor and Commissioner Maigret, one of the aces of the special branch. There were pleasantries for everyone. The Grand-Café, a favorite haunt for the people of our town, the victim, valued by all for his honesty and devotion, the gendarmerie, under the direction of the distinguished Lieutenant Velpaw, the arrival of Chief Commissioner Gabrielli, whose flair and intuition Dr. Dubois always active when it comes to... Anything new? Madame Maigret asked. Nothing new, nothing old, nothing at all. An entire column that explained only that the butcher had been killed not 100 yards from the notary's house. The truck had been stopped by a punctured tire, and the man himself killed by a shot to the chest. That was it. In his jacket pocket, they had found an empty wallet. The weapon had been left at the edge of the road. A large-caliber revolver. Seeing Maigret heading toward the summer house with a fishing rod in his hand, his wife was taken aback. You're going fishing? But what if they... She meant to say, if they need you, and at that exact moment, the door knocker sounded. Maigret grew angry and somber, recognizing from a distance the butcher's widow. She had already put on a black dress, though not yet of crepe. Madame Maigret showed her into the dining room and immediately hurried to her husband. She wants to speak with you in private. Put on your other slippers. These are completely worn out. The butcher's widow waited until the door closed, cleared her throat, wiped her nose with a handkerchief, and looked Maigret in the eye with the instinctive distrust of a tradeswoman. I want to consult you, she began. I know you were my husband's friend. I imagine he told you some of his secrets. No, madam, I can assure you that your husband never shared any secrets with me. But really, you saw each other every day. Surely you observed him and... There's no point in continuing, madam. I assure you I was not observing your husband. We played cards, it's true, but our acquaintance ended there. You have nothing to tell me? Yes, I see. And what if I told you that I know everything? Not just since today or yesterday. Mind you, he was absolutely out of his mind over that girl. I saw how he changed. Listen, in the end, he even stopped loving our son, becoming irritable with him. Last Sunday, he even thrashed him over a trifle. Forgive me, madam. Let me finish. I could have made a scene, stopped him from going to the cafe to see that girl, but I preferred to suffer in silence, hoping it would pass. On Monday, I saw Angeli leaving for Orleans, and I was certain my husband's truck was somewhere nearby, and that he would come home in a good mood that evening, just like any other day. I only came to ask you. I repeat, madam, I know nothing, absolutely nothing, and I wish to know nothing. The police are handling the investigation. Parquet is supposed to arrive this morning. He's already here. In that case, you understand that. He couldn't simply throw her out, and she was clutching at every possible straw. I had hoped that in such circumstances... You must understand that I am powerless. The official police are on the case. The investigation is taking its course, and will inevitably end as it must. When he finally managed to close the door, he remarked, Well, that's one more enemy made. Why did you refuse to look into it? I know that woman slightly. All the worse. To him, it was all perfectly clear. He headed to the far end of the garden, not to fish, but simply to set his tackle in order. There was no need to go into town to know what was happening. He could picture the butcher's widow returning home, passing groups of idle onlookers, and the Grand-Café, always packed, with patrons drifting in and out. Besides, today was market day. The street was choked with peasant carts, Cows lowered their tethers, and women carried poultry by the legs. The butcher was dead. His family had arrived from Amboise, where he was born. Reddened eyes, wet kisses, the smell of flowers, burning wax, and children who didn't know what to do with themselves on such a day, forbidden from playing in the street. When the door knocker rattled again, Maigret merely lifted his head, shot a glance at the summer-house door, and sighed. Next! They would all come here. Of that he was certain. He'd have been better off going fishing and spending the day in a boat just off the bank. How else could he stop them from pouring out confessions he had no desire to hear? This time it was the mayor. Maigret received him not in the dining room, but in the summer house, where he could at least keep his hands busy while his visitor droned on. I had hoped to see you this morning, the little man said. Fearing you might be unwell, I dropped by to check on you. Another one. Where was he leading? No doubt he, too, had come to gossip about the butcher's love life. Naturally, after last night, your mind must have started working. Don't say no. Commissioner, a man like you cannot be part of drama like this without, consciously or not, beginning to look for the solution. It's the same with me when I see an animal. Instinctively, I start examining it. By the way, do you know Michel the blacksmith's son? Maigret was painstakingly tying a lead sinker to his line, looking even more focused than he actually was. Being an official, I've always been concerned about him. I trust there are no professional secrets between us. Yes, quite, Maigret replied gravely. Then I can tell you, though everyone knows it anyway, that he's a desperate character. His father has had nothing but trouble with him. He's 23 now and hasn't settled into anything serious. Well, he's been living back in Mung for some time now. I believe he was unemployed in Paris. Finally, I might add that he's already been arrested once for fighting. After that, good day, Mr. Mayor. Admit it, at this moment you aren't thinking about your fishing rods at all, and your mind is... And what of it? Just because this Michel had pulled a knife during a local festival, did that mean he'd murdered the butcher on the road? The curious thing was that, once alone, for the next half hour Maigret found himself, though loath to admit it, listening impatiently for the door knocker. He was like those peevish children who refuse to play with the others, but cannot help watching their games with envy. Why hadn't he just gone down there to the Grand-Café like everyone else? And why this charade, this constant pretense of being annoyed whenever someone brought him news? It was around noon when there was another knock. This time, the commissioner saw a man he certainly knew but couldn't quite place. We worked together once on that forged passport case. I was just a plainclothes inspector then. Allow me to introduce myself. Commissioner Gabrielli. A pleasure, a glass of white wine, sit in the sun. It's not yet warm enough for the shade. I expected to find you on the scene, but I was assured you were stubbornly refusing to see anyone. Look here, don't you find this whole story intriguing? I've spent all morning conducting interviews, and all I've learned is that the butcher was a lover of Angeli, the maid at the Grand-Café. I looked into her background immediately. It turns out the girl had a perfectly miserable childhood. Her father was a heavy drinker. I told myself she might have had some suspicious connections. Perhaps some young rogue of a lover. And your health? Am I boring you? Of course. You were there. You already knew all this. I assure you, Maigret sighed, I knew absolutely nothing. The butcher is dead, and I regret it as much as anyone. You have a strange way of talking about it. A cigar. A pipe? Well, I see you don't want to talk. When I heard you were there, I thought my task would be much simpler. Madame Maigret, fleeing from the kitchen to the garden and back again as she prepared a ragout, cast worried glances at her husband. She had never seen him quite like this. He reminded her slightly of the Maigret from those dismal autumn days when he had the flu, a flu he always tried to hide. In short, Gabrielli concluded, I've found nothing on that front, and yet I can hardly suspect the mayor or you or the blacksmith. I've done a detailed ballistics test on a revolver, but I'm not pinning much hope on it. It's an obsolete weapon, the kind you find all over the countryside. A vagrant, perhaps? That's what we usually say when we're stumped, and then the gendarmerie has the thankless task of rounding up every tramp in the district. He was still hoping Maigret would finally open his mouth. But no, The man remained impassive, not even posing a single question. Madame Maigret, however, hurried to offer Commissioner Gabrielli a helping hand. "Won't you stay and have a bite with us, Monsieur le Commissaire? I have a lamb ragout today, and some young asparagus sent from the Isle derived by a relative of mine." One had to be truly brave to accept that invitation, given Maigret's sour expression and his total lack of effort to be civil. An odd bird, Gabrielli told himself as he beat a retreat, empty-handed. Did he know something? Or was it just age? Provincial life? And Madame Maigret, who rarely nagged her husband, allowed herself a remark. "You weren't very polite to that young man. I don't know what's bothering you, but I felt ashamed for you." He didn't bother to answer and poured himself a third glass of white wine. Perhaps he had been expecting this since morning, and it was the waiting that had soured his mood. At any rate, when he heard Angeli's voice asking Madame Maigret if the commissioner was in, he stood up, opened the door, and said quickly, "Come in here." "In you go." Closed the door. He led her into the dining room, leaving his wife in the kitchen. He lit his pipe and paced the floor before selecting a chair for his visitor. "I couldn't come any sooner," she began. "I was only hoping you would come by yourself so I could talk to you." She was calm. She seemed to be waiting for questions Maigret ought to have asked, but the commissioner merely busied himself scraping a tiny speck of paint from his sleeve. "The police haven't asked me anything. Still, I thought that you, being one of the inner circle, would surely be in the know. So I've come for you to tell me what to do." "About what?" "About the butcher. You knew, of course, that he was chasing after me, even though it drove Monsieur Urbain into fits of mad jealousy. On Monday, he started following me in Orleans again as usual. He wasn't a bad man. Many times he cried in front of me, and that was why I eventually gave in." Heaven knows Maigret did nothing to encourage her to continue her confession, yet nothing could stop Angeli, who felt a desperate need to unburden her soul. "Monsieur Urbain was convinced I'd gone to a hotel with the butcher twice. He told me I had to choose. I was in a difficult spot because, for his part, Hubert, that's the butcher, wanted to leave his wife, his job, and his son to run away with me. What would you have done in my place?" Did she really expect him to answer? It was enough that he was listening to all this. After a few days, he finally made up his mind. He wrote me dozens of letters. He claimed he'd had enough, that he couldn't go on living like this, that if I didn't leave with him, he'd kill himself. It was up to me to answer, wasn't it? That letter where he spoke of suicide. It arrived the day before yesterday. Should I tell the police? Should I tell Monsieur Urbain at the risk of... But surely everyone must be told that he killed himself. She wasn't crying, merely sniffing quietly, staring dejectedly at the floor. "I was hoping you'd give me some advice. Monsieur Urbain suspects something. This morning he was hovering around me, trying to find out what I was going to do. He's so jealous that I'm always afraid of something bad happening." Maigret moved to knock his pipe out into the ashtray. "I have nothing to say to you," he grunted after a long silence. "You don't believe me? Perhaps you think I made it all up? Here, I've brought the letters." She pulled them from her handbag. Poor, crumpled letters written on cheap grocery store paper. Maigret recoiled, making it clear he had no wish to see them. "Read them. Now that he's dead, it doesn't matter anymore. It's not necessary. You don't want to believe it was suicide? It doesn't matter. You think he was killed for the money? Tell me, is that what you think?" "My poor Angeli, I'm not thinking anything at all." "Why poor?" "No reason." "Forgive me, but I can't give you any advice. Do as you see fit. As they say, follow your conscience. As for me, I've already forgotten everything you told me." She stood up, pale and trembling. "I don't understand you." "It doesn't matter. One would think you suspect me, even though... Is it true? Do you think I killed the butcher? But weren't you in the cafe when he died? And if I hadn't been there, you would have thought..." Maigret sighed. Time seemed to have stood still. He wondered if he could maintain this facade of indifference until the end. "Go now, Angeli. It's better that way. I know nothing. I want to know nothing." "Fine." She headed for the door and left in a state of total confusion. Turning back once she was in the street, to see if he had come out to call her back. And Madame Maigret asked him with a knowing look, was it her? What about her? You know perfectly well what I mean. Not in the slightest. Come now, admit it. There's a reason for the way you're acting today. I've known you too long not to see it. This isn't your usual self. Even last night when you came home, what did I do? Nothing, but you had that look about you, as if something had bored you or you'd simply had enough. And what's so strange about that? That you haven't set foot outside like everyone else? You've never been one to sit indoors all day before. I can't bear to hear another word about the butcher. The butcher or that young girl? When will you ever grow up? Thank you very much. They came within a hair's breadth of a genuine quarrel, something that hadn't happened between them in years. Maigret paced the house like a sick animal. When is the funeral? His wife asked, as if in passing. I don't know. Will you go? I suppose I ought to. Don't you want to tell me why that girl came by? No. Are you expecting anyone else? I prefer it if they stop coming altogether. Unfortunately, it's inevitable. They all have this mania for confessing to me. You didn't used to complain about it. Don't you think you ought to shave? He shaved and, for want of anything better to do, changed his suit and his slippers. He had barely finished getting ready when the door knocker announced the next visitor. Leaning over the banister, he recognized Urbain's voice. Don't disturb him. I'll wait. By the way, has Angeli, my little maid, been here? And that brave simpleton, Madame Maigret, deciding to handle it for the best, said, I don't recall. To tell the truth, I wouldn't know her by sight. A thin little thing, dressed in black. I don't think so. No, better ask my husband. Maigret shrugged his shoulders with a grimace. He finished dressing, opened the window, took his time lighting his pipe, and stared out at the Loire, where a light breeze was whipping up small waves. Finally, he made up his mind to go down. He entered the dining room and closed the door. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Forgive me for bothering you, but if Angeli has already been to see you, you've likely understood. The cafe owner watched Maigret anxiously, nervously kneading the brim of his hat. Sit down, please. A glass of white wine. I expect they're waiting for you at the cafe. Urbain gave a start. What do you mean by that? Nothing, only that it's market day. There must be a crowd. You think so, too, then? Think what? That it was I who killed the butcher? I am certain that's impossible, Maigret said, picking up his glass, because you were in the cafe at the time. No. Urbain looked him in the eye with a sort of defiance, and Maigret replied, Then it's even worse. Chapter 3. To tell the truth, it had always seemed to Maigret that Urbain regarded his customers with a poorly concealed distaste. He performed his duties as a host, of course, smiling and joking with the clients, even taking a seat at the card table if a fourth player was needed. But his cheerful manner had always struck Maigret as forced. When Urbain laughed at the garage owner's jokes, for instance, one got the impression he actually wanted to lung at him. At other times, he would cast remarkably somber glances toward their table. It's boredom. The former commissioner had told himself. A man of 35 has no business standing behind the counter of a provincial cafe all day long. And now the same Urbain, who usually wore his resentment so openly, had suddenly let his emotions snap. Losing all dignity in Maigret's dining room, his face contorted, he abruptly burst into tears. This is the first time I've ever cried in front of another man, he muttered, agonizingly embarrassed. What a foul, wretched business. If this goes on, I'll end up putting a bullet through my head. He was in that state where, faced with the sheer unfairness of fate, one wants to scream and stomp one's feet. When the game ended last night, God knows why, I was hit by another fit of jealousy. Oh, I knew Angeli had promised me she wouldn't see him any more. Starting next week, she wasn't even supposed to go to Orleans for her day off. I'd beg her not to, and yet, after sitting there for over an hour next to the butcher, thinking that he'd taken her to... Tell me, have you ever suffered from jealousy? Maigret merely shook his head with the blessed indifference of a confessor. I couldn't stand it a moment longer. I went out the back door, as I often do, and spent 15 minutes leaning over the parapet of the bridge in total darkness. Are you sure no one saw you? Even if they did, they'd hardly have recognized me. It was quite dark. The commissioner from Orleans just asked me a few questions, and I could tell he suspects me, though no more than the rest. Tell me. Should I tell him everything? And what if my wife tells him that her life with me, miserable as it already is becoming a living hell? That's all I came to ask you. I can't live without Angela, you see? I can't explain how this love came to be. At first, I thought it was just curiosity. Then it turned into a kind of mania. I suffered even if a customer so much as looked at her or touched her. I don't give a damn about my wife anymore. I'd sooner leave her than lose Angela. Believe me, Commissioner, I didn't kill the butcher. What am I to do? How can I prove it? What do I say when they interrogate me and I can't even offer an alibi? Who will believe me if I say I spent those minutes standing on a bridge? I didn't kill him. It's the truth. And my position is all the more terrible because I was capable of doing it. But not for money. Do you believe me? Maigret felt her bane-strained, terror-stricken gaze fixed upon him and looked away. Tell me, do you believe me? I cannot answer that. So you don't believe me? And yet we've known each other a long time. What will those who don't know me say then? Calm yourself, I beg of you. Easy for you to say. Urbain scoffed. There's no reason to think you're under any more suspicion than anyone else. Commissioner Gabrielli was just here, and we spoke about you briefly. The suspicions are all so vague that I think, in the end, the case might just be dropped. Maigret spoke in an undertone, without looking at his guest, and it was so unlike him that Urbain couldn't fathom what lay behind the words. You think they won't find the killer? I don't know. Thank you. I thought you were a friend, a comrade, if you like. I was wrong to bare my soul to you. Forgive me. I suppose you think I've completely gone to pieces. I assure you I don't, Maigret repeated firmly. Would no one ever understand that he simply couldn't say anything? Go back home. Try to stay calm. Keep a grip on yourself. If they question you, answer as you see fit. As for me, I haven't really remembered a word of what you've told me. But he knew that a man never forgives another for seeing him vulnerable, especially in vain. Urbain, slowly regaining his composure, tried to force a crooked smile. You must have thought I'd gone quite mad, he joked clumsily. There have been more tragic cases than this. Maigret replied. Are you sure you won't have a drink? No, thank you. As you said, there must be a crowd waiting for me. My job is to serve the customers. And to be the fourth man when someone misses a game. Good day, Monsieur le Commissaire. He had barely vanished when Madame Maigret appeared, having clearly cast aside her usual restraint. I thought I saw him crying. And since her husband didn't answer, she grew cross. You've sworn to keep your mouth shut, haven't you? Are you going to mope around all day again? You know, I'm starting to wonder what's really behind all this. Maigret gave an ironic smile. You're absolutely right. I killed the poor butcher myself. Don't be a fool. I'm not talking about the crime. I'm talking about that girl. For heaven's sake, just don't start being jealous. And why not? Because it isn't the time. Everything is sad enough as it is. What's so sad? This whole little drama. Because that's all it is, a little drama. So pathetic, even ridiculous. If you look closely enough, did it ever occur to you that Angela could drive two sensible men out of their minds? Well, she looks like a frail, sickly child, underfed, with deep circles under her eyes and pale skin that's never seen the sun. That doesn't mean anything. You're right. It doesn't mean a thing. But here's the interesting part. For two men, this Angela embodied a feminine ideal and replaced every other interest in their lives. I used to suspect that in the back of Beyond, in total isolation, when a passionate man is overcome by boredom, a blind infatuation can take hold. Strong, handsome men start pining for some singer in a local dive and brawling over her. That's what happens when there's no one else to compare her to. But here, in this respectable town on the banks of the Loire, only a few miles from Orleans, his wife watched him, surprised by his sudden loquacity, a rarity for him. She didn't dare interrupt, fearing he might abruptly fall silent again. And yet, he continued, can you explain why every evening for over a year, at 5 minutes of 5, I leave this house, walk to the Grand-Café, and for nearly 2 hours show as much zeal as if my very life depended on those painted bits of cardboard? It's not because of her, is it? Don't start that again. I knew you wouldn't understand. I was telling you about infatuation. It's the same thing, a mania, if you like, a necessity that arises when there's nothing else to do. For the first time, he ventured a subtle hint regarding his retirement, a thought Madame Maigret herself had considered many times. You go there once or twice at first. Then, one fine day, you feel completely at a loss if the game is canceled for some reason. You get used to the faces, the jokes. You have your chair, your deck of cards. He wasn't speaking for her, but for himself. Since that morning, no, since yesterday, a revulsion toward his current life had been festering within him, and he felt a distinct relief in unburdening himself of this heavy feeling. It is exactly the same blind infatuation. Try to understand that other people, in the same circumstances, latch on some girl and start treating her as the center of their universe. I remember the reactions of people during my time at the Special Branch when we dealt with crimes of passion. I'd show them a photograph of the woman, and almost all of them would exclaim, "She isn't even pretty. How can anyone kill for her?" The heroines of passion plays are never beautiful. This poison doesn't act instantly. When Urbain, alone among us, really looked at that girl, the feeling struck him like a terminal illness. The mere thought that the butcher, haven't you guessed yet? He killed him. Madame Maigret blurted out, completely missing the point. There you go. Back to the same thing? Is that all any of you care about? Blood. Mystery. He killed. But damn it all, don't you see there are other things in life? I'm trying to explain a soul-wrenching drama to you, and you ask me who did the killing. Try to imagine that street corner by the bridge. The Grand-Café with its terrace and laurel trees and green tubs, and opposite, the red railings of the butcher's shop. On one side, the butcher's wife, stuck in the shop all day, only stepping out to call her son playing in the street. On the other, another woman, sad and sickly, and another child, and a man consumed by a single thought, Angeli. And this Angeli, small, plain, probably dim-witted and entirely devoid of charm. And yet the butcher and his neighbors circle her like stallions around a mare, both tormented by jealousy, watching each other, threatening each other with their eyes, wanting nothing else in the world. Now do you understand? Madame Maigret replied, I understand that men are animals. That's all you've managed to explain. But what will he do now? Will they arrest him? At that, Maigret grew angry, went up to his room, slammed the door, and, not without reason, turned the key in the lock. He didn't reappear until dinner, and was in no better a mood. However, he asked suspiciously, Did no one come by? No. Ah. Were you expecting someone? Me? No. Whatever gave you that idea? In the span of a few hours, he had done everything possible to make people lose a desire to consult him, yet he found that this provided him with no joy whatsoever. Are you going out after dinner? And why exactly should I be going out? I don't know. I just thought. Maigret did not go out. The following morning, having packed a lunch, he spent most of his time fishing. He returned only at 4 o'clock with a fairly large pike and some perch for frying. "The funeral is tomorrow morning," his wife announced. "Will you come with me?" "Why not?" "The newspaper seems to think it was a vagrant's doing. Not a single word about that Angeli girl. And nothing. I just thought. Don't. It's not worth the effort." He stayed in, just as he had the day before, on the day of the funeral, dressed in a black suit and accompanied by Madame Maigret. He attended the butcher's service and walked all the way to the cemetery, once or twice. His colleague Gabrielle tried to strike up a conversation, but Maigret always pretended to be deeply preoccupied. Urbain was there, accompanied by Citron. Angeli attended the service as well, keeping to a dark corner of the church. "Aren't you going to the cafe with the rest of them?" It was a sunny day. People were drifting into the Grand-Café to have a drink and gossip a bit more about what had happened. Maigret preferred to head home. For the next week, he threw himself into fishing with a passion. Then, he decided to refurbish his boat, hauling up onto the grassy bank and working on it for several days, constantly smearing himself with tar and green paint. "You know, they seem to have given up on the investigation. What do you want from me?" "I just thought." As always happens, one fine day the boat looked as good as new, but the desire to fish had vanished. Since the warm weather had arrived and the first lilies were in bloom, Maigret now spent his time in the garden, reading Fouché's memoirs. "Why don't you play in the evenings anymore? It used to entertain you." He didn't answer, but these hints soured his mood. One day his wife announced, "The butcher's shop is going up for sale. The widow received 100,000 francs in insurance and is going to live with her sister in Orleans." Maigret did not react, immersed in his own thoughts. Weeks passed before he finally emerged from this state. One day, when he had gone for a stroll and didn't return until 8 in the evening, Madame Maigret remarked, "You're back very late." "I was playing Jacquet," he admitted, "at the Grand-Café. No, at the Commerce, with the new butcher." "Why do you never tell me anything?" "Because. And you won't say anything now?" "No." That summer, they decided to go to Savoy, though they didn't see much of it, as Madame Maigret was a poor walker. Chapter 4. It was 3 years later, around the time the lilies began to bloom. Maigret, in his clogs, was transplanting young lettuce when his wife opened the mailbox and pulled out a funeral notice. "Look at that. She's died after all," she said. "Who?" "The woman from the Grand-Café, Madame Urbain. The milkmaid said that for 3 months she couldn't swallow anything but milk. You really ought to go and pay your respects." That same evening, Maigret went to the funeral home and stood for a few minutes in the cold hall, in a corner which Angeli was quietly sniffing. 2 days later, everyone went to the cemetery, and the Maigrets returned home arm in arm. The weather was beautiful, leaving no room for dark thoughts. This reminds me of one of the low points of my life. He began suddenly, though no one had asked him. Madame Maigret prudently kept silent this time, and they continued their walk, stepping off the road to stroll along the banks of the Loire. "I don't know if you remember the butcher. I knew everything, from the very first moments, probably even from the second the news broke. Of course, I couldn't tell anyone what I knew. It was a matter of honor in the face of death." Madame Maigret was mechanically plucking the petals of a daisy she held in her hand, like a figure in a painting by some artist whose name Maigret had forgotten. They walked slowly, parting the tall grass. The former commissioner's trousers were peppered with burrs. What struck me was the painful insistence with which the butcher kept telling us he had a lot of money on him. Like most provincial tradesmen, he was obsessed with his wallet. It was enormous, stuffed mostly with small, dirty bills, and he kept it in his trouser pocket. I remember well the gesture he used to pull out, lifting his apron each time. Yet that evening, he went out his way to show everyone that his wallet was full of large denominations. But here's the strange thing. I had the impression that while a 1,000-franc note was poking out from the top of the stack, there was nothing but ordinary paper underneath. And then that visit to the notary, when they announced he'd been murdered, I said to myself, what a very strange coincidence. Because I have never seen a man practically beg to be robbed, and perhaps killed. When I heard about the murder, I was certain that, even if the money were gone, the wallet would be found in the dead man's pocket. So he wasn't murdered? Madame Maigret asked in surprise. Of course not. And the poor devil couldn't even manage a clean job of faking his suicide. He did it like an amateur. If they'd sent anyone other than Gabrielli for the official investigation, it would have been cleared up in no time. But Gabrielli, a charming young man, no doubt, is much better at Russian billiards than at police work. She smiled, and they walked on a little further. That is why I was bound to silence. That is why I didn't want to listen to all those people's revelations. But they came to me anyway, whimpering and pleading. I still don't understand why the butcher did it, because the poor man was capable of both the worst and the best. Madly in love with that girl, he begged her to run away with him, and if she had agreed, he would have abandoned his wife and son without a single pang of conscience. He wouldn't even have remembered them. He had already begun to drift away, first by ignoring them, then by buying Angeli gifts she didn't know what to do with, since she couldn't show them to Urbane. When she finally made it clear she didn't want to see him anymore, he decided to kill himself. And in his misery, he realized how much pain he'd caused his family. I'm certain that was the moment he thought of his wife and son, not in the sense that he would die, but that his death should serve them. That's why he signed the insurance policy, why suicide was out of question, and where all that foolish behavior came from, the talk about the notary and the repeated mentions of the money he was carrying. Well, I never would have thought of that, said Madame Maigret. And all this time, I was wondering why you let the guilty party go free. That should have been someone else's concern, especially since Urbane, by pure chance, had no alibi when he came to confess to me, weeping with terror. I thought I might have to reveal the truth just to keep him out of prison, but what else could I do? I wouldn't have liked to see the poor fellow die for nothing, but since I'm no longer in the police force and not on the payroll of some insurance company. He stopped, squinting against the sun, and admired the landscape enlivened by the murmuring waters of the Loire. I'm glad it's all in the past, anyway, he sighed. I didn't like it one bit. And you never told anyone? No one. Not even Urbane? Not even him. Not even Angeli? He couldn't suppress a smile. Jealous. Oh, no. It doesn't matter what I think of men now. So, this infatuation you told me about, it can just happen one day because some girl serves you an aperitif at the same time every day? Maigret kept smiling, feeling a sense of relief at having finally told someone his story. And also because it was finally over. The butcher's wife in Orleans had remarried a clerk from a water company, whom the boy calls Uncle. The mourning period was over. No one doubted that Monsieur Urbane would marry Angeli. Today, however, the cafe was closed, and a black-bordered notice hung on the shutters. Madame Urbane was left all alone in the cemetery, while the townspeople hurried back to the city, exhaling the last of the graveyard air that, along with the scent of incense, clung to their clothes. And would you be capable of such a thing? Madame Maigret asked suddenly, as they reached a narrow lane leading from the river bank to their gate. Capable of what? I don't know of everything like them. Well, that's what happens when you tell women anything, he joked, reaching into his tobacco pouch to light his pipe. He asked mechanically, and what's for lunch? I'm absolutely starving.